In this video, I'm going to count down my top 10 MMA cards of 2024. I'd say 2024 was a pretty good year for MMA, and listing this out, I'd say there were 3 defining trends of the year. Firstly, and most glaringly, was the absence of one championship. It's strange saying that this was probably the year I've enjoyed one the most, but its MMA offerings have been lacking substantially compared to yesteryears. And at this point, it's clear to me that they are Muay Thai and kickboxing organization first, MMA organization second. The second trend I noticed is OKTAGON continuing to put on some of the most entertaining cards in the sport, with 2024 being their best year yet with no signs of slowing down. And the final trend I noticed was the UFC continuing to pull ahead from its major competition, primarily in terms of the talent on its roster. Now, without wasting any more time, I just want to get everyone on the same page. This is my list based on my enjoyment of the card, purely subjective, aligned with my personal taste and preferences. I also won't be spoiling the results of events that occurred in the last 2 or so weeks. But let's not waste any more time and jump straight into it with number 10. I didn't expect to like PFL versus Bellator champs as much as I did. The PFL didn't do the absolute worst job, and unexpectedly didn't take the gimmick for the event and over or undercook it. I really enjoyed AJ McKee's submission chain finish over Clay Collard, reminding the world that he is still one of the best non-UFC talents. I also enjoyed Renan Pereira beating Ryan Bader in just 21 seconds, getting him the recognition he has definitely earned in his uber entertaining PFL run. And Johnny Eblen versus Impa Kasanganay was everything it needed to be. But in general, the card is on this list because I like it conceptually. I just think putting 2 organizations' champs up against each other is just fun, and wish there was more of these type of events. No, this wasn't the best demonstration of the concept. The Saudi crowd was also noticeably void of any energy, and PFL definitely could have done more in terms of the lineup, especially considering they owned both organizations. However, the card was fun, did everything it promised to, had some decent fights, and tried something different, which we don't get to see often. Coming in at number 9, we have OKTAGON 65. Even though OKTAGON have been putting on awesome cards for a few years now, I think 2024 truly marked its breakthrough year in the MMA landscape, firmly establishing itself as much-watch MMA. OKTAGON 65 was headlined by the best possible tournament matchup with the finals of the Tipsport Game Changer Lightweight Tournament. It's rare that a tournament progresses exactly the way everyone wants it to, but throughout 2024 we got the top 2 pound-for-pound fighters in the organization, lightweight champion Ronnie Paradisa up against featherweight champion Lawson Keita, in a rematch from a 2022 matchup. It's one thing when a matchmaker puts together a fight fans want to see, especially for a second time, but it just hits different when the chips fall that way in a tournament format. And the fight didn't disappoint. Taking place in Prague's O2 Arena in front of a now legendary Czech crowd, I won't spoil the results of the card as it just happened, but if you've never watched OKTAGON, this is a great place to start. In a UFC world where fight nights just aren't what they used to be, UFC Fight Night Jan vs Figueiredo felt exactly how I remembered the peak of UFC Fight Nights feeling. In a rare return to form for a UFC Fight Night, we got the formula that originally made UFC Fight Nights must-watch events. We got the main event of 2 huge names competing for something meaningful, in this case Jan and Figgy looking to gain a title shot with a victory. We had a high-ranked fighter from the region with Yan Jiaonan, a high-potential prospect with Carlos Olberg, and loads of regional talent putting on entertaining fights. It felt like we'd get a fight night card like this at least once every month or so pre-pandemic. But this quality of fight night has become much more rare recently, and thankfully the fights in this card held up their end of the bargain. The main event especially was such a fun fight where the stats and scoreline didn't do a great job of reflecting the story of the fight. We also had Shi Min almost flatline Feng Xiaokan in one of the best knockouts of the year. It's a good sign that the UFC are still able and willing to put on this level of non-pay-per-view, and I'm hoping 2024 can bring more of these events. I'd say UFC 299 was the most solid UFC card of the year. Not saying it was the best or the most enjoyable, but when I picture what a good solid UFC pay-per-view should be, I picture something like UFC 299. Hosted in Miami, Florida, which always produces good crowds, and add in an Ecuadorian in the main event, and all the card had to do was deliver some exciting fights. And bam, we have a high energy and engaging card. The undercard for this event was definitely decent, but not anything that would particularly stand out compared to other UFC pay-per-view undercards, with highlights including Mateus Gamrot vs RDA, Mikel Pereira doing, well, Mikel Pereira things, and Curtis Blades, well, not doing Curtis Blade things. But UFC 299 was all about the main card, with Peter Yan and Song Yadong opening the card, JDM finishing Gilbert Burns and firmly establishing himself as a top welterweight contender, the UFC debut of MVP, and of course one of the feel-good moments of the year, with Dustin Poirier turning back the clock and reminding everyone he is still one of the best fighters on the planet. The main event itself between Sean O'Malley and Chito Vera was a very solid main event with a lot of tension and the crowd hanging on every big moment. For me, UFC 299 is what every UFC pay-per-view should be and an easy pick in this list. I feel every year Rizin is producing less and less cards that would be on a best cards of the year list. I've talked about Rizin producing more events than they really need to on the channel before, but on one hand I am happy to be getting more Rizin cards overall, but it does mean that there aren't as many cards that stand out anymore, especially in the greater mixed martial arts landscape. Rizin 48 is similar to UFC 299 just before it, in that for me, it was just a very solid card that did everything I liked about the organization. Held in the best combat sports arena in the world, Saitama Super Arena, the card started hot, with 4 first round finishes straight off the bat. We also had Seika Ozawa take on Kana Asakura in one of my favorite women's matches of the year, and a completely unexpected retirement from Asakura that turned into a bit of a tearjerk. On the main card, notably we had a vintage performance from Yuki Motoya, and Naoki Inoue capturing the vacant bantamweight title against former One Championship champion Kim Soo-chul, with Inoue really starting to look like the fighter many believed he could become just a couple years ago. And on the main event we had Robert De Souza defending his lightweight title against Luis Gustavo, finishing the fight in just 21 seconds, firmly establishing Roberto as one of the most underappreciated fighters. Rizin 48 was the first solid entry in Rizin's catalogue this year for me that didn't depend on some crazy stipulation, a co-promotion, or a big name from America. Just a solid, good Rizin card. Every KSW event at this point is must-watch television, and I think KSW's best card of the year was KSW 90. Held in Warsaw, Poland, and if you know anything about Polish combat sports, they absolutely love Arek Rososek, who headlined the card. The promos and videoettes heavily leaned into this connection between Rososek and the Polish fans. I feel like this year was a bit void of hometown heroes getting a big moment in front of their home fans, but Arek got this moment in front of his legion of rabid Polish fans, knocking out Croatian Ivan Vitasovic in just 55 seconds. For me, KSW 90 easily had the best crowd of the year, and the energy translated well over the screen. As for the rest of the card, what else can I say? It's KSW. The 10 fight card only had 2 decisions with crazy finishes littered through the card top to bottom. If you haven't watched this card or KSW, please do. OKTAGON 62 broke the record for the biggest European MMA card in terms of live attendance of all time, getting around 60,000 people in a football stadium in Frankfurt, Germany. Now, as cool as these massive stadium events are, I find they typically don't actually translate well for both the live audience and through the screen. Live because, well, the cage doesn't scale to the stadium, so most people don't tend to have a practical view of the cage. And for both the live and televised audience, as it's hard to fill a stadium that size with that signature MMA atmosphere, so cards can feel a bit flat. OKTAGON 62, however, was able to create magic and overcome all these hurdles. One decision I loved is that throughout the card, the crowd wasn't actually darkened out, which did an immense job of consistently reminding the on-screen audience of the absolute scale of this event. The stage production with all the big screens just looked epic. The crowd definitely did their part in bringing the atmosphere into the stadium. As for the card itself, it more than delivered, with pretty much every fight being an absolute banger. Dennis Ilbay opening the card with a KO finish inside 3 minutes in front of his home country crowd set the tone, and it never flatlined from there. The main event of Christian Erkelin versus Christian Youngworth, promoted as the battle for the title of King of Germany, was genius, putting arguably Germany's two biggest stars in front of 60,000 German fans with what I think was the best promotion campaign of any fight of the year, and yeah, you have a recipe for a highlight moment of 2024. UFC 308 is the representation of the UFC's biggest advantage over every other organization, which is the absolutely highest level talent in the world with no organization even remotely close. This card in terms of having high level talent on it was just ridiculous. Literally every fight either had a respectable prospect, an established contender, or champion/former champion. Highlights for me included both Shara Bullet and Leon Murphy stamping their way into the mainstream, and Ilia Topuria cementing himself at the top of the sport. The only complaints I have about UFC 308 is that these Abu Dhabi crowds don't carry a lot of energy that translate well to the screen. But when the card is this good, I don't need any help getting excited. A bit of an unexpected one for me personally. It's rare that an end-of-year Japanese card isn't number one for me. Ever since Pride and Dream's end-of-year spectacle cards, I've always been excited unbelievably for Rizin's continuation of this tradition, hosting the best cards they possibly can on December 31st. And for the most part, Rizin has done an excellent job of capturing this magic. And it's not that this year was particularly bad, not at all. It's still number 2 on my list, but relative to other New Year's Eve events, it just didn't have as much of that magic. But still, this was one of the best cards of the year. Held again in the greatest combat sports venue in the world, Saitama Super Arena, and although I just said it didn't have as much magic, there was still that special feeling and big card feel. I won't spoil the results for this card as it just happened, and because this card is currently the best gateway into Rizin if you're not already following it. But we had 3 title fights with most of Rizin's biggest names, headlined by Chihiro Suzuki, who has been quietly carrying the organization for a few years now, with their other stars Roberto de Souza, Kyoji Horiguchi, Yuki Motoya, and Seika Ozawa filling in the rest of the card. We also had the finals of Rizin's Kyoshin tournament, which is like their youth pathway tournament. I've been quite critical of Rizin over the last year, and while I'm a bit pessimistic of their overall direction and future, it still makes me unbelievably happy that they are still able to put on these end of year cards. And as long as they host them, I'll be watching them, and I don't think they'll ever not be near the top of these lists for me. I will admit I was skeptical heading into UFC 300. The card didn't feel as stacked as was promised, and there wasn't that storyline of venom to carry the narrative of the card, like there was with Lesnar and Mir in UFC 100, and Jones in DC with at least the lead up to UFC 200. But in saying that, UFC 300 turned out to be the best MMA card of the year. Max Holloway had the best knockout and moment of the year, Alex Pereira was Fighter of the Year, if not a very close second, and Yuri Prochazka continues to be one of my favourite fighters in the world. Zhang Weili is also continuing to change the landscape of women's MMA, and I had the most fun watching UFC 300 of any card this year, and to be honest, I'm not sure if it was very close. Okay, so that was my list of the top MMA cards of the year. Please leave in the comments any cards you think I missed or would reorder. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps me a bunch, and check out the other content in your screen if you'd like. Thank you again so much for watching.